Well, welcome everyone to today's conference on American leadership in advancing the Sustainable Development Goals, or the SDGs. Let me take just a second before I offer my remarks to acknowledge that some of you are coming to us from the West Coast or from the American Gulf Coast. And if you are, please know that our thoughts and prayers are with you as you deal with the fires on the West Coast and the air quality, but also for those of you on the Gulf Coast dealing with Hurricane Sally. This is your third hurricane in about a month. So our thoughts are turning to you as we gather today on issues which include climate and the climate environment. So thank you for joining us even during these difficult times. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the second iteration of our partnership with the United Nations Foundation. Elizabeth Cousins, thank you very much for joining us today. We are so glad you were able to take the time to be with us this afternoon. Indeed, one of the benefits of hosting this event virtually is that it enables us to open it to a much larger group. So to everyone, especially those tuning in for the first time, you are most welcome. Thank you. Now, as we celebrate this year, the 75th anniversary of the United Nations, a great celebration, we can at the same time celebrate one of the most compelling achievements of the United Nations, the SDGs, and their role, which we quote as saying, it is a blueprint to achieve a better and more sustainable future for all, unquote. What a great aspiration. And the focus of the SDGs on leaving no one or no community behind is more essential than ever. COVID-19 and its disproportionate impact on the vulnerable frontline workers, especially those from our Black and brown communities, as well as the sad and tragic killing of George Floyd and the attention it has brought to systematic racism and continued injustices in our country, these all demonstrate just how important the SDGs are to the United States. For found within the SDGs are solutions to many of the underlying problems embedded in our society today, from income inequality to disparities in education, access to technology, healthcare, and more. The SDGs offer a way forward, one that helps the many and not the few. What's more, these SDGs are rooted in our shared and cherished values, American values, that have seen us through some of the toughest moments in our nation's history. These values are at the heart of true American leadership, and that's leadership that's alive and well throughout all the sectors of our society today, even as it is largely absent from the US government at the moment. Indeed, leadership from cities and businesses, philanthropy, universities, and our youth, all are strong sources of American leadership and will be showcased later in this program. Our innovation, leadership, and commitment to demonstrate just how our values are actively reflected in and manifested in the SDGs are essential as we go forward. Now, American values are also rooted in global leadership, and that serves the best interests of the international community. And these goals were founded in the United Nations, after all, a global body which we must support. And it is critically important that our nation continue to engage globally and constructively to solve the world's most urgent and pressing problems. The COVID-19 pandemic has proven without a doubt that solutions depend upon global cooperation, and our country's credibility in doing so depends upon the extent which we show the world just how well we can take care of those issues right here at home. So today's event will demonstrate that leadership goes beyond promises and commitments. It takes courage to act and the will to realize solutions for the good of us all. We are bringing back today some leaders from last year who will describe what they've done in the past 12 months to advance the SDGs. It's really an exciting and excellent program. We'll hear from Los Angeles Mayor Eric Garcetti on how his city and his counterparts around the country and the world are taking ambitious steps to prepare a recovery from COVID that is both sustainable and extraordinarily important, inclusive. We'll also hear how the state of Hawaii and Carnegie Mellon University and the city of Pittsburgh are holding themselves accountable to the SDGs by publishing voluntary reviews and how businesses like Verizon and Walmart are unleashing innovation to align business practices with the SDGs. The commitment to the SDGs shown here today is one that the Brookings Institution has truly taken to heart. And to that end, I am very proud to announce that we are readying for launch this fall our own Center for Sustainable Development. It will provide a nexus for our leading scholars in this realm, like Tony Pippa and his colleagues, to mobilize research, policy engagement, and networked leadership for sustainable development and accelerated progress on the goals within the United States, but also worldwide. Finally, this event takes to heart the commitment by Brookings and the United Nations Foundation to diversity. This panel reflects the richness of American society, and it is infinitely better because of it. It also raises the importance of listening to the next generation of voices that are actively shaping our future. And I am thus very pleased and honored to introduce Fatimata Cham, a published youth poet, activist, and Girl Up Teen Advisor alumna. So welcome, Fatimata. It is so wonderful to have you with us today. You honor us by your presence, and the floor is yours.
Thank you for that introduction. Today I'm going to be reading a poem titled Thank you for that introduction. Today I'm going to be reading a poem titled Hope. We hand children crayons to color the world, but some are given broken ones, forced to color in lines that weren't made for them, forced to look in a world where they may not see themselves. So they make makeshift coloring books, using it as a guide to navigate the worlds around them. But it's 2020 now. These children have grown up now. They have left their makeshift coloring books away. So I hand them pencils and papers and they write down their questions. Number 1, what are the greatest communities in America? I answer, the greatest communities in America are the ones who never make the front page of news stories, the ones who show the importance of collective strength, are ones like right here in the South Bronx, New York, working with organizations like Youth Over Guns to combat the issue of gun violence and educational inequality right in their backyard, are ones who show the importance of resilience, are ones who know the value of an education, the value of knowledge, the value of questioning systems of oppression and injustice, the ones who stand whilst others are sitting. In looking outside my window, I see young people leading the way, breaking down doors, calling for action. Very quickly, I learned you don't need eyes to see the world because those who see never truly understand the world for what it really means. Here we are again. I'm asked another question. Number 2, how can I live through COVID-19? Very quickly, I answer, working collectively to reduce inequalities. COVID-19 should not be treated as a separate issue, for it is heavily intertwined in every facet of our lives. Economic inequality, racial injustice, gender inequity, climate change, poverty, and hunger. The list goes on. This is what's at stake here. Human lives, children's lives, mothers' lives, fathers' lives, our future. I pause and I'm asked another question. Number 3, will I live to see 23? How can a child have such a question? But maybe it's because they see themselves on the TV screen so much that they start to believe in something different than them. Another one gone, another RIP, another he could have or she could have, another Black child left wondering what their future will hold. But alas, one last question comes floating in and it struck me to the core. Number 4, how can I have hope? I answer, pull out your coloring book, the one you abandoned all those years ago. Retrace the lines drawn for you to form new ones. Color outside the lines. Color outside the lines. Color outside the lines. See the world not for what society tells you, but for what lies in the hearts of millions. So fight for the future you want and reshape it to form a new one where people like me, Black Muslim hijabi women, are heard too, one where immigrant parents like mine are heard too. Our future lies in those who are willing to center voices too often shut out. Emily Dickinson once said, "Hope is a thing with feathers, so look for it. In times of injustice, in times like these, if you listen quietly, hope is the sound of your own voice." Thank you.
Well, thank you, Fatimata, for evoking hope so wonderfully in the face of the issues our communities are facing today. Hope is indeed the sound of our own voices, and your voice has powerfully set the stage for us. So thank you for that inspiration. My name is Tony Pippa, and I'm a senior fellow in global economy and development at the Brookings Institution. You know, the SDGs are a revolutionary agreement in many ways. They force us to color outside the lines, as Fatimata so aptly put it. So to set the context for this second edition of this wonderful event with the UN Foundation, I'd like to touch on several of those. First, they're the first global agreement on development to be applied everywhere in the world, an acknowledgement that all of our societies, no matter how wealthy, are still developing in some way. And here in the US, they then encourage us to work to continue toward that more perfect union that our Constitution describes. Second, as John mentioned, the SDGs ask us to leave no one behind, to prioritize and to reach the most vulnerable first, to include those who have been left out of reaping the benefits of the global economy. And third, they ask us to make progress on human concerns like poverty, health, hunger, and education, social concerns like justice, inequality, and human rights, and environmental concerns like climate change and biodiversity loss, and to make progress on those things all at once. And that imperative to take on multiple problems simultaneously certainly makes them an agenda for our time as we experience the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, racial inequities and injustice, and the out of control wildfires in the West and bigger, stronger hurricanes in the South and the East. And as John mentioned, the SDGs give us that blueprint for how to build back better, to transform our economy and society to be more equitable, healthier, more just, more resilient. By doing that, they make this not just an agenda for government, but for all of us, for all sectors of our society. And that's why today you will experience how many parts of US society are taking that to heart as we hear from a diverse array of voices. But what I don't think we realized when we were putting the SDGs together is the extent to which it also made this ambitious global agenda a local agenda. Because achieving these things, leaving no one behind, tackling climate change, solving multiple problems at once, starts at home, in our communities, with local leadership. The pandemic, the wildfires, the impact of racial injustice have just confirmed this. They've revealed just how much local leaders are on the front lines of solving global problems. We've relied upon and been grateful for the leadership of mayors, governors, and local institutions during the response to these crises, and they are increasingly taking the lead in shaping a recovery to leave us in a better place. At Brookings, through our leadership, our SDG Leadership Cities Network, we're privileged to work with US cities and their global counterparts that are committed to achieving sustainable development locally. And it's the work of those US cities and their counterparts in business, philanthropy, and civil society that make them global leaders and give America credibility in addressing these challenges. They've shown us how the SDGs can be a tool to identify where and how we must do better, from New York City providing a model through their first local review against the SDGs, which has inspired other cities worldwide and even other sectors, as we'll hear from Carnegie Mellon University today, to Los Angeles launching an open source dashboard, Pittsburgh developing measures of equity, and Hawaii undertaking a first statewide review. But these leaders also embody something else. They embody the spirit and the meaning of the SDGs, showing us through their leadership and governance how equity and sustainability must shape our policies, our resources, and our conception of what it means to be a healthy community and a healthy nation. And on that note, I'm pleased that we have with us today Mayor Eric Garcetti of the City of Los Angeles. Mayor Garcetti is a fourth-generation Angelino whose passion for his city is immediately apparent and who's committed to making Los Angeles a fairer, more resilient, and sustainable place. And he's working with mayors across the US and globally to do the same for the world. We're grateful he is here today to share his reflections with us. So please welcome Mayor Eric Garcetti.
Well, thank you so much, Tony, and thank you for the kind introduction and your amazing work. I'm so excited to be here today. And Fatimata, thank you for breathing hope back into a year in which so many feel hopeless and are carrying so much weight and so much stress. And General Allen, thank you for all you do with the Brookings Institution. And I want to acknowledge your work and Elizabeth Cousins and Casey Brown and the entire team who, together between Brookings and the UN Foundation, are putting us together at the most critical moment in our lives to have these discussions. And I know, because I watch Zoom and I participate in Zoom all day long, it can be something which we all start checking our email and our texts. We all start kind of looking at 2 dimensions and forgetting the 3-dimensional work that we have to do. But I hope this moment people will realize this is what history feels like. It is painful to go through history, but it is so strong and has such deep potential as well. And so I'm so excited to be in great company alongside my friend, Senator Schatz, and thank you, Governor Ige, for joining us as well. So many longtime friends and colleagues and change makers. And what a season this has been. I mean, the loss and upheaval, the worst health crisis in a century, the righteous rage that's filled our streets, an economic emergency in every city and on every continent. I woke up this morning talking to the mayor of Dhaka in Bangladesh. I talk regularly with mayors around the world and we compare notes to see and to feel just what that suffering is like, the pain that we carry, but also the promise that we are seeing. And here we wake up in Los Angeles with these deadly wildfires that have consumed the Western United States, blanketing the West Coast in a dangerous haze, but smoke reaching all the way to New York City. And in an astonishing year, when I think about what we've experienced in my own city just in the last 2 weeks, it's almost unthinkable. We open our windows to see this blood red sun rising or falling at the beginning and the end of each day, the worst air quality that we've had in decades. The hottest day, not just in September and not just here, but in our world's history, in our state, and the hottest day ever in my city in history. We see hurricanes coming 2 at a time or moving slowly, but being bigger and dumping the rain that we see right now. If ever we needed a sign from our fellow human beings or from Mother Nature, it is right now that change must come and that we must not just set our goals boldly, but we must figure out the work to reach those goals. In other words, if our reach must always exceed our grasp, now we must find a way to grasp to those goals that seem so far away. You know, as a mayor, I wake up every single day and I go to sleep every single night focused on the people of my city. I try to picture 4 million souls because we get lost in numbers. This is really 4 million people that are at the heart of a 19-person continuous metropolitan city called Southern California. It's now the 3rd largest metropolitan economy in the world, behind Tokyo and tied almost now with New York. It's a tall order to try to consume and feel what those dreams and those tragedies and those challenges and those triumphs of 4 million souls are like in our neighborhoods, the vulnerability to forces that seem completely out of our control, not just in COVID-19, but in the years leading up to, and the anxiety about a world that feels like it's falling apart. Talk to a young person, my daughter, who's 8 years old, who really stresses about whether the world will still be here. In the same way that some of us grew up wondering whether nuclear weapons would destroy the world. That is a daily stress. It's a trauma that people are carrying. Whether it's violent winds now that we see in Iowa and Washington State, the twin hurricanes that I mentioned that had gathered over the Gulf, it's the trail of neighborhoods that are razed and families who are newly homeless in cities and towns thousands of miles away, people who are still in homeless shelters 2 years after the Paradise fires here in California. So we're all grappling with this as a human challenge, not just a policy issue, not about statistics and data, but as human feelings, human needs, and human yearnings. And we're grappling with the same questions, those of us that are public servants and people. How on earth will we navigate through this? How can we possibly address all of these crises at once when one seems to pile on the next on the next? Well, I think we start by recognizing that the world is our home, that it exists in our own backyards, not some distant place. The United Nations is not about over there, to paraphrase Eleanor Roosevelt's words when she was helping to write the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It's right here in the places we work and study and live, places so small they're not found on any human map. She wrote that, of course, before Google Maps mapped every last inch of our lives and our world. But the sentiment that it is where we are right now that is the world. And what we do in our neighborhoods ripples far out beyond municipal borders. Everything and everyone is more interconnected than we have ever been, both in terms of our economy, our relationships, but even deep down in our spiritual connection that exists right now. So we aren't confronting some sort of laundry list of great challenges when we look at the SDGs. These are a set of deeply interwoven issues, problems that are feeding and fueling one another. And we will only meet our goals with the SDGs if we treat them really as local goals, work that begins and ends at the beginning of the day and the end of the day at home, where we live and work. The Sustainable Development Goals are showing us how to do that, a comprehensive set of values as well as principles and goals that asks us to see an entire picture and demands that those of us who've worked in one area see the interconnectivity with another, and that we own each one of these together. In Los Angeles, we've helped to pioneer the tracking and connecting of SDGs and to use them as a prism for everything we do, to have a city librarian or a port executive director, somebody who runs the largest municipal utility in the country, or somebody who heads up our fire department, to know that she or he has this prism through which everything we are doing must be refracted. Because we can only fight climate change if we address gender equity. We can only confront racial injustice if we address health disparities. We can only recover from these converging crises of the world today if we take bold action to build a just, green economy that's fair for generations to come. So our global goals come to life when we understand them as local goals, when they're rooted in our communities, and they help us stay ready for the new and emerging threats. Threats like COVID-19. A year ago, if we had gathered, this would have been a radically different conversation. Maybe we would have given one panel to the possibility of a global pandemic. Now it consumes everything that we're doing. But I've long believed that leadership is not defined by the things we say we do and how well we do them, but by the things we don't expect to happen and how well we react to them. If you look at history, it isn't that who knows what Abraham Lincoln set out to first do as president of the United States. It is the crisis that he faced and how he dealt with it that defined who he was and where our nation went. And 6 months ago, when the virus arrived in my city, I had to make some of the heaviest decisions, forget some of the heaviest decisions of my life and death decisions, to save as many lives as possible and protect as many livelihoods as we could. They were the heaviest decisions of my life, but some of the easiest ones I've ever made. Because using a framework like this, we know that the answers are clear, even in our worst moments, that we don't have to wait very long to decide how precious a human life is, even if that means closing down an economy or asking people to wear masks or mandating the changes in behavior. We know we will look back at those moments as saying we rose to this instead of ran from it. And because some looked out and saw this crisis and saw a clash between health and the economy, how often did we hear that? We looked at it as two pieces of the same puzzle. When some feared that racial justice would be pushed to the side in a pandemic response, we had already put racial justice long before people were marching on the streets as part of what would drive our response to COVID-19, eliminating, for instance, the racial gap of African-American deaths in our city, maybe the only city in America that's done it so far, so that the deaths are now under the represented population in Los Angeles with intentional racial justice policies that helped our most vulnerable people. Confronting COVID means addressing deep inequities that have grown deeper with this disease, filling new gaps that were emerging with health, wealth, housing, and immigration status. And so our programs were designed to confront that head on, erasing the racial gap, as I mentioned, in our Black community and early virus deaths, launching the largest tenant assistance program of any city in the country, putting a moratorium on evictions, raising tens of millions of dollars to help our immigrants and anybody associated with immigrants who simply by being their spouses and children were written out of relief in our country when they were keeping our hospitals clean, picking our food, stocking our shelves, and contributing, as immigrants always do, to the core of our economy. So at every stage of this crisis, we have been reminded that we are only as healthy and as safe and as strong as the most vulnerable among us, a lesson that the SDGs has as its foundation. But there's another takeaway that we should have from this period, something that should inform the vision for the future we want. We're more aware than ever that our most pressing problems ignore political boundaries. A deadly virus will find its way through every checkpoint. Emissions on our continent lead to bad weather in Mozambique and vice versa. A crisis in one of our cities leads to protests in all of our cities. And this is the principle that informs my work. As chair of C40 Cities, the strongest network of mayors of the major cities of the world, focused on climate change, but the strongest network, period. 96 mayors whose metro areas represent a quarter of the world's GDP. And since the earliest days of this pandemic, that community of local leaders has been connected globally, in constant contact, talking about how we set up testing, early practices, and deepen the work of solving the toughest issues, to not let, for instance, climate and resilience get pushed to the side because of a health pandemic. And we had an advantage. We had already built up a foundation, relationships for action. When no one needed to remind a bunch of mayors of the stakes in a moment of deep crisis, but hearing from the mayor of Milan when northern Italy was peaking, hearing from mayors in Taiwan and China and Korea about what they were doing to test. We knew immediately some of the work that we could do, and we looked past this moment to the future. Confronting the immediate painful impacts of climate change every day in our communities led us to making sure we could and floods are displacing too many people. Life will return to normal. Mayors know that things wanted to return to normal because it wasn't working to begin with. Vision for the next generation. The plan is that the of goals. And think about it this way. You know, if the universe deserve to have, and then the SDGs will have. So we know what our rights are, goals are, and then this is green print for getting there. The plan lays out a just transition away from carbon-centered economies, calls for equitable solutions for our cities that bear an unequal share of the fallout of climate change. And we know these aims can't be met in some sort of a vacuum. We want to reach a zero carbon reality in Lima and in Los Angeles, in Lahore and in Luanda. And everywhere in between must share the conviction that this decade, the 2020s, must be a decade of action, the climate decade. Too late to reverse the damage we've done, but not too late to mitigate it. And that only collective action will allow us to address these challenges that ignore borders, whether it's deforestation or drought or disease. And it is that approach, that unified determination, that positions C40 mayors to spring into action and put forward a C40 mayor's agenda for a green and just recovery, which draws on the principle of the Sustainable Development Goals by explicitly connecting our priorities together, making them indivisible. For instance, and environment teaching is actionable plans for all of the world's cities. If we get this right, we will not only transform our cities and build fair economies, we will allow the next generation to breathe a sigh of relief. And boy, haven't we been talking so much about just wanting to breathe this year. Whether it's in racial justice or our smoke-filled skies, we all, metaphorically and literally, need to breathe. This, my friends, is what our moment is asking of us, to do our part in guaranteeing the most basic of desires, to have life, to have freedom, and the promise of a better day. More than ever, we see we're not living up to that promise. We've failed in so many ways, from structural racism to the way we pulled apart in a pandemic instead of together. The way that economic catastrophe has thrown our most vulnerable neighbors into hunger and homelessness. A series of murders that have shaken each one of us, but reinforced the mortal dangers of being Black in America and propelled a peaceful and powerful movement across the globe. None of this happens overnight. Each injustice is a symptom of a disease that's left untreated, a structural racism that still touches every organ of our civic life. The white picket fence that once kept some out of the neighborhood still too often keeps their children and grandchildren out of the capital market. The red line, which used to mark parts of town that were valuable, runs straight down the road to opportunity, dividing us between those who have more opportunity and less. It was embedded in our laws and society. So many of us have spent our lives trying to correct them, but now everyone, as a friend told me, it's not just that people are woke, they're starting to get out of bed. And what we can do to heal the scars of history at this moment. For instance, this summer I signed an executive directive requiring our city departments to ensure that the starting line is the same for everyone. For people of color, women, people with disabilities, and veterans can each have equal opportunity. Appointing our first chief equity officer and demanding each one of my 38 departments do the same, come up with a plan, and that we enforce it. And we're leveraging data. And if SDGs teach us anything, it is to follow data. So we're the first city in the world with an online dashboard where anyone can see our city's progress towards the Sustainable Development Goals, something that I hope other cities will join us in. It's easy. We'll share our coding with you, change the data, change the city, and join the movement. And thanks to the Conrad Hilton Foundation, we're launching another tool today, the Sdg Activities Index, a living encyclopedia of the people and the organizations and companies who are advancing the SDG goals in Los Angeles. Under the Activities Index, LA residents will be able to find projects and initiatives, connect with new partners, become part of this movement to solve our most pressing issues here at home. This is how we are confronting a reality we hardly recognize, not just because of compacts that are global or commitments from governments and banks and NGOs, but by translating it down to where we live on our block. Not just a list of items to check off, but seeing how they touch each other and move together. We see today a global document, but I see it as a local one. And so often Americans in particular reject anything that comes out of the UN or global compacts as not having to do with them. We look at foreign policy as something that is foreign, rather than as global policy, that's something that is local and American. I hope that I can be part of a movement to change that. A community that works together to do what it needs to do, from lighting up an electric charging infrastructure to the PTA investing in the empowerment of girls. A city where every individual can see her place, make her mark in the community that she calls home. I began with a scene in my own backyard, and let me conclude with a scene very far away, but it's still close to home. Over a decade ago, I traveled north in Canada to just to the edge of the Arctic Circle, to Iqaluit, which is the capital of Nunavut. And there on the ice bed, where we looked at the change that was being wreaked across our planet and sent out a cry to do something about global warming. On that day, I met the mayor of that town. And she said, "Thank you for all that you're doing in Los Angeles." After we described the first green building ordinance in American history, we were talking about shutting down coal plants. And this was in 2005, I believe. And she said, and I said, "Why are you thanking me for what I'm doing in LA?" And she said, "In my lifetime, I've seen us go from the ice age to the nuclear age. That's in one generation of my people. And we're seeing now everything that we ever had begin to melt away. What you do in Los Angeles is saving us here in Iqaluit." And I said, "Well, vice versa. I want to thank you for everything that you are doing right here on this ice shelf to make sure that you live in a sustainable way, because that's going to save my city in Los Angeles too." We have always been interconnected on this planet, and we have always lived in local communities. And that isn't a paradox. It is something beautiful to behold. So I invite everybody to join this movement where you are and where you live, to push your mayors and your cities to do the same work and to translate the abstraction of these beautiful goals into wins at the level that we can see with our own eyes, feel with our own hands, and celebrate with our own children. I want to thank you for the opportunity to address you, and I want to introduce amazing partner in this, New York City's Commissioner of International Affairs, the counterpart of our Deputy Mayor here, who I want to thank as well, who did an amazing job working on all of this as well, Nina Hachigian. But Penny Abeywadena is one of the global leaders of the city global movement to embed these ideas at the local level, and she's done an incredible job in New York. Penny, the floor is yours. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Mayor Garcetti. It is a pleasure to be an original Angelino, especially with your leadership in LA, and it's a privilege to work with your international affairs team led by Ambassador Hachigian on localizing the SDGs in our great cities. It is a pleasure to join all of you today, and I'm very grateful to the Brookings Institution and the UN Foundation for inviting me to participate today. As the mayor mentioned, I'm Penny Abeywadena. I'm the Commissioner for International Affairs in the city of New York, where we have been localizing the SDGs since day one. I'm very pleased to moderate our panel today on the engines of action for SDGs, which bring together leaders from different sectors to share specific action on the global goals. Here in New York City, we know about action. This spring, we were the epicenter of the COVID-19 pandemic. And as we rebuild and reimagine our new normal, the global goals continue to be a critical framework and tool for us. Our work with the SDGs goes back to 2015 when we mapped New York City's development agenda, One NYC, to the global goals. Unsurprisingly, New York City's strong equity lens meant that we had synergies with all of the goals. And that year, my office launched the Global Vision Urban Action Platform to create programming that would allow cities and states to exchange best practices on localizing the SDGs. We also created a program called New York City Junior Ambassadors that enables New York City youth to learn about the global goals and, most importantly, take action in their community, just like Fatimata from the South Bronx shared with us earlier. Our work with the Global Vision Urban Action program led to the creation of the Voluntary Local Review. This tool, now a movement, was welcomed by our civil society partners, as well as senior leaders at the United Nations and member states. And as Tony mentioned, we submitted the first ever Voluntary Local Review during the 2018 High-Level Political Forum. And now, 2 years later, we have over 200 local governments and cities committed to the New York City Declaration for the Voluntary Local Review. And I must say, we have witnessed this movement grow and gain importance during COVID-19. And that's why it's so important that this conversation we're having today, and why everyone from our youth and our local governments to academia and the private sector must be creative and activated to achieve these global goals. So it is a pleasure to turn to our panel. I'm going to ask them all a quick question as a way of introduction. So please keep your response to 1 minute. But as I introduce all of you, please address this question, which is, what is the value of sustainable development in general and the global goals in particular for the priorities of your institution, especially in light of the pandemic, and how are you using it in your work? And Rose Kirk, who is the Chief Corporate Social Responsibility Officer of Verizon and the President of the Verizon Foundation, I am going to turn it over to you, Rose.
Oh, thank you so much. And it's such a pleasure to be here and to be with this esteemed list of panelists. So I think to get right to it, if you think about Verizon, you start with the fact that the UN Sustainable Goals were developed at a time where our current CEO, sat on the board of the UN Foundation and was one of the architects of the SDGs. And so we have always understood our responsibility to not only embrace the SDGs, but to ensure that they are deeply embedded and mapped to every single business operation that we have within Verizon. So we don't see this as something that sits off to the side or as something that is a part of just our corporate social responsibility work. It is a part of our business strategy. And it starts actually with the technology that we create, because our technology is an underpinning for actually developing solutions for the issues that the SDGs are actually trying to solve.
Absolutely.
But more specifically than that, the work that we are doing in education, the work that we are doing around affordable and clean energy, doing one of the largest green bonds in the nation, our work with decent work and economic growth, which extends not only to our own employees, and during the time of the pandemic, being a corporation that did not lay off a single employee and still has not, and one that is committed to ensuring that our employees are actually able to be successful, but what our commitment to society as a whole and the work that we've done with small businesses to enable their success because of the economic engine that they drive on a global stage. And then we're also committed to climate action and to some other very specific work that I know we'll get into a little bit later. So that will give you a high level overview, and then I will defer to my other panelists for their perspective.
Thank you, Rose. That was an excellent introduction, and we will definitely get into those issues in the next round of questions. I want to now turn it over to Majestic Lane, who's the Chief Equity Officer for the City of Pittsburgh and Deputy Chief of Staff for Mayor Bill Peduto. Sorry about that.
No problem. Thank you. And, you know, as Rose said, it's great to be on a panel like this with so many folks who are doing so many things in so many different parts of our society. For the City of Pittsburgh, essentially, it connected local activities to global realities. We were able to see that the things that we were doing were not just things that were part of a very specific Pittsburgh conversation, but a part of a global conversation. And in being part of a global community allowed us to see that the activities happening for us were also happening other places, what we could learn from, and then also how we could measure it, right? So it allowed us to work with internally to see that, and then I know we'll talk a little bit about our partners, but that's what it did. It connected our very local activities to global reality.
Thank you, Majestic. I'm going to now go to Dr. Yvette Pearson, who is the Associate Dean at the George R. Brown School of Engineering at Rice University. Oh, I think we might have lost her for a second. So I'm actually going to go to Kathleen McLaughlin, who's the president of the Walmart Foundation and Executive Vice President and Chief Sustainability Officer for Walmart. And then we will go back to Dr. Pearson after you. Thank you.
Hey, Penny, thank you.
Hi.
Well, the SDGs for us, they're kind of a Rosetta Stone. We think of it that way to help, us connect to people in business and government and civil society who want to collaborate on the issues of our time. And as was already mentioned today, one of the beauties of the SDGs is they pertain to everyone in the world, every country. They pertain to business and government and civil society. And they recognize that social justice, environmental sustainability, economic prosperity, these things are intertwined. They cannot be separated. And what's been really exciting for me to see is in the last few years, business finally waking up to that fact and coming to the table and working alongside others for that vision of a sustainable planet for people.
Excellent. And it looks like Yvette is joining us by phone. Yvette, can you hear me? Yvette, you are on mute. Folks, we could be doing this for years, and I think we're still going to be working on the perfection of the Zoom. While Yvette is going to be rejoining us, because we have such a short time, I'm just going to jump into the panel. Rose, I'm going to kick it back off to you to sort of really dive into what we were talking about before. And I have to say, we've seen it in New York, we've seen it throughout the country, but the pandemic has really revealed the importance of digital connectivity and the effects that inequalities and access in our different neighborhoods have on everything from education, as all our kids are largely going back online, to healthcare, to employment. And I really would love for you to just pull out, how's Verizon working to address these inequalities using the spirit of the SDGs, but how do you also see the role of businesses like Verizon to better spread the innovation that is required, sort of accelerated by COVID-19 and the economic opportunity to promote the SDGs and sustainability in the US?
Yeah, so let me just kind of break that apart a little bit. I mean, if you think about the space of the need for a quality education, SDG 4, we have been in the space of education for a really long time, and recognizing that unfortunately, so many vulnerable and underserved young people don't have access to technology. And so the work that we've done, our Verizon Innovative Learning Program, came out of that spirit of how do we enable that connectivity for free for as many youth as possible. And we were very deliberate, in focusing in the middle school space and providing free access, devices, a curriculum, to underserved students to ensure that they had everything they needed so they can compete with their, frankly, wealthier classmates. As we looked at the pandemic, we understood that we had to do even more to level that playing field. And so we have, across the nation, enabled millions of young people to have free connectivity to help with their online learning. We're in the process of building a global technology platform that will be available to help parents and students be successful with remote learning. And then we also have been putting 5G, the latest technology, into schools for free. Because what we have found as we did our Verizon Innovative Learning work is that, students need to learn what that next level of innovation is going to be. And 5G is a solution that's going to enable that. But as a part of putting 5G in the schools, we were also able to actually bring along a whole host of 5G solutions for education that we were able to create, which frankly, pumped up small businesses themselves who are delivering some of those solutions. So I guess it just boils down to, we understand this issue, we live it and breathe it every single day, and we enable that connectivity broadly and richly in order to make a difference, because we know that the long-term consequences for not having that connectivity and that quality education could be long-term poverty for individuals if they don't get what they need today.
That's exactly right. That's wonderful. And I am very pleased to welcome Dr. Pearson. Listen, it is okay. We're all, this will never be perfect. So it is such a pleasure to see you. Welcome back. And then, in addition to that introduction, just because we're running out of time, I just want to jump into your question, which is, across your significant contributions and leadership in engineering education, you've worked to expand the definition and focus of engineering and to make engineering more inclusive by broadening participation of students from marginalized communities. But how do you see engineering as a profession, the curriculum, its professional associations, as critical to addressing issues like poverty, inequality, and sustainability? And, as if that's not a big enough question, what more needs to be done to ensure that engineers from diverse backgrounds and experiences are meaningfully involved in the problem solving that is going to be necessary to advance these global goals?
Yeah, thank you. And I'm glad I was able to reconnect. And I'll answer from the broader perspective of, I think there is increased focus now on the people part of sustainability and how, as other people have mentioned, the societal impacts. And to me, it's very important to have that societal input in the problem solving process. And so I think previously there was kind of this disconnect between what we do as engineers and what this inclusive design and problem solving looks like. So I can say that both at my institution, Rice University, and my professional society, the American Society of Civil Engineers, we've long had that focus of the very critical bottom line for people to be engaged. One place that I see that happening, or great opportunities to really expand that, is through engineering curricula. Specifically, if you look at engineering accreditation criteria, and ABET accredits engineering and other programs worldwide. But if you look at the ABET accreditation criteria, there are numerous places where we have the opportunity to innovate in our curricula, to look at how we're preparing students to solve complex engineering problems. And one of those characteristics would be involving diverse perspectives, whether it's diverse demographic perspectives or diverse perspectives from other disciplines, which again really strongly ties to the foundation of the UN SDGs. Another piece is really being able to recognize, as was said earlier, that each of us plays a part in every single SDG. And I think it's kind of, I guess, habit to kind of gravitate for civil engineers, for example, to something like the clean water or sustainable cities. But we recognize that we do have a role to play in eradicating poverty, eradicating hunger, and then reducing inequalities overall. And so that's really been the thrust of a lot of our work to really, and I like to use this, this platform, redefine engineering and engineering education. So re-imaging who we see as engineers and what we see as engineering, and really expanding that to really cover the people part strongly. De-silo our academic programs and our approaches to problem solving so that we're not just focusing on the technical part and leaving the societal pieces out. And then fine-tuning our climate and culture so that we have systems that people can thrive in. And it includes not only having diverse perspectives amongst the engineers and amongst engineering students, but also being able to equitably engage communities, societies in the problem-solving process.
Wow, Dr. Pearson, I'm trying to think how we can get all of our junior ambassadors talking to you. We need all the young people working with you. Majestic, I'm going to move over to you. Pittsburgh has been a critical partner and a recognized leader in integrating the SDGs into its city strategy and building partnerships across the community to advance these goals. Now, addressing the inequalities, while we know we're dealing with this, responding and recovering to the pandemic requires a collective, regional, and cross-sector mentality. How are the SDGs, including the development of your own voluntary local review, being used to connect these platforms and to bring these constituencies together? You know, we were drinking out of the first fire hose, and now we've got like 10 coming at us. And I'm just so curious how you guys are managing that in Pittsburgh.
No, thank you. And so what I would say is that many of our challenges, they are emanating from the same fire hose with different holes, or the same water source in different fire hoses are hitting us, right? And so I think with that is the question of this time. And I think the SDGs helps us realize that, it helps us bring everything together, that many of the challenges are interrelated and interlocked. And if you're trying to resolve one of them, you may often find yourself resolving more than one if you're doing it in a comprehensive manner. So Pittsburgh is no stranger to collaboration. You know, I think everyone, or many people may know the story of Pittsburgh. And as our mayor says, in 1979, three things happened. The Pirates won, the Steelers won. Pirates won the World Series, Steelers won a Super Bowl, and the lights went out. And while, you know, that's a little bit of hyperbole, it is not hyperbole to say that the city went through a economic and social depression. And, you know, Pittsburgh's reemergence as a global city and international city has everything to do with the collaboration between the philanthropic community, between the business community, and between the municipal community to be able to prop itself back up, you know, in the Rust Belt and things like that. So we're no stranger to that idea of collaboration, and that's really the key that runs through this conversation around the Sustainable Development Goals. One of the challenges that we have, and that many governments have, and folks who are in government can acknowledge this, is the roles of silos and people who are really good at thinking about what they do well. And so you can have those things running together, running alongside together, but never touching, never connecting, never intertwining. So my role as Chief Equity Officer and also Deputy Chief of Staff is to really be cross-cutting and identify, if we're making Pittsburgh a better place for every citizen, then how should we be engaging internally with making sure that that we're, you know, cutting out these silos and de-siloing, as you've said, and then how do we then take that to our broader community, right? So how do we then, if we say we can de-silo, and that we say that we know that what happens with transportation has everything to do with what happens with public safety, because they are connected. And what happens with our development stuff has everything to do with our water and how we deal with retaining water. We know that those things are connected, so we try to do our best to do that. Then we work with our partners, and we have a lot of great partners, one of which you'll hear about today at Carnegie Mellon from a university side. We also have nonprofit and philanthropic partners like the Forbes Fund and the Coro Center, who've all really engaged in this conversation and been inspired by the leadership of Mayor Peduto and the administration to really engage with each other to do it. So that's really been the key for us, is to do it internally, to stand on it, and then to think about what is the broader sense of engaging. And I think we find now the one positive of the challenge around COVID and health disparities, as well as the racial unrest and economic challenges we see, is that people see those are all connected, that you can't disconnect them to solve our challenges today, right? And so we're leading with that kind of process in order to work together. And the VLR has really brought that to bear, and then working with others to see how we interact with each other, how we can truly make the city better in tangible, measurable metrics, right? You can't manage what you can't measure. So once we can do it internally, once we can engage with others, then we can do it in a broader sense for the good of the entire region.
That's exactly right. And we've seen the voluntary local review be an opportunity to exchange these best practices and policies so that we can accelerate impact on the ground, right? It's not always about what's new. It's what can we replicate, to accelerate impact in our community. I am going to go to Kathleen. For those who are watching who don't know this, Walmart is the largest private employer in the US. It has 140 million customers every week across the country, more than the total population of Mexico. I did not know that. And I was giving the company a unique reach to work for inclusion and health at home and sustainability globally. And I have two questions for you. Why is Walmart's commitment to sustainability important to its customer base? And what are some of the examples of how you're supporting this work, both locally as well as globally? And the fact that you also wear the dual hat of president of the Walmart Foundation, this is a really unique opportunity for philanthropy. And just curious how you're looking to also, work within that sector to advance in the US the Sustainable Development Goals.
Yeah, thank you. Well, there's not a lot of time and there's so much that we could talk about. So I'm just going to focus actually on one issue set out of the SDGs, and that would be 12, 13, 14, 15, that collection of the goals that have to do with climate, natural ecosystems, waste, responsible consumption, and so on. And what we're trying to do at Walmart is use our assets as a retailer. You engage with suppliers in all of the product chains that they work on, whether it's produce or beef or apparel, or you name it, across the US for sure, but all of the 27 countries where we operate, and change the way production of consumer goods happens for sustainability. And that means social and environmental sustainability. But let me just focus a minute on the environmental side. So when it comes to climate and natural ecosystems, we've created a platform that we call Project Gigaton, which we've developed with World Wildlife Fund, World Resources Institute, Environmental Defense Fund, Conservation International, and so on. So many NGOs who work in this space. And it provides a mechanism for companies all around the world to engage in 6 areas to decarbonize the way products get developed, which our customers care about and appreciate, knowing that, okay, well, you're actually helping take the emissions down from the things that I need day to day for my family. So the 6 areas are energy, waste, packaging, agriculture, forests, and product design. So suppliers, we now have 2,300 companies engaged in this work with these NGOs in different countries with that, SDG 13 in mind in particular, but this pertains to nature, oceans, and agriculture, and waste reduction, and so on, to try to decarbonize these supply chains. So we're now at 230 million metric tons of carbon avoided from these supplier projects working with the NGOs and with us. That's a quarter of the way to our goal, which is a gigaton of emissions reduction by 2030. So it's just one example of how something simple like an SDG or a set of those can help create a shared vision and really provide a platform for that collective action and help us go, more quickly. So we're doing that through business primarily, but then what we do with the foundation is come in and say, all right, where are there bottlenecks in these systems where philanthropy can catalyze and unlock? So for example, we helped launch Global Forest Watch, a tool to help people sourcing goods to know it's not deforesting land. That was through philanthropy. That's one example. We've done work with smallholder farmers pretty extensively in Mexico, Central America, India, through our business sourcing, but through philanthropy to help support their productivity, sustainable production practices, income improvements. So these things go hand in hand, and they're very complementary because we're trying to accelerate transformation in systems. So private sector and philanthropy and government, economic, social, and environmental sustainability. We're trying to tackle it very holistically.
That's fantastic. And that's actually a great place to end on, because I think that is what this entire session has been about, is how we can all, our collective action is going to further the SDGs. It is now my honor to introduce Provost James H. Garrett Jr. Provost, it is an honor to see that the Voluntary Local Review has inspired Carnegie Mellon University's Voluntary Local Review, our University Review, sorry. Thank you so much for joining us today. The floor is yours, Provost.
Thank you for that introduction, Commissioner Abby Wardina, and good afternoon to all of you. I want to start by thanking the Brookings Institution and the United Nations Foundation for their leadership on this agenda and for the opportunity to be with you today. A year ago, at this event in New York, Carnegie Mellon committed to conducting the world's first voluntary university review, and to come back this year to share our findings, which we released publicly this morning. As Provost and Chief Academic Officer of Carnegie Mellon, my job is to oversee the academic affairs of the university and to define and implement the academic priorities that shape its mission. One of my first priorities as Provost has been to center values for equity and inclusion into our mission, language, and climate. When I announced the launch of the Sustainability Initiative during the UN General Assembly last year, it was with the understanding that sustainability goes beyond environmental topics to include critical issues of equity and inclusion. The global pandemic has exposed the inequities that characterize so many communities and underscore the importance of engaging in the development of communities across the globe so that no one is left behind. To advance the global goals at Carnegie Mellon, I created a Sustainability Initiative Steering Committee and Advisory Council made up of students, faculty, and staff. A unique contribution for universities is that we're educating many young people who will carry forward our mission. So incorporating the global goals now will help ensure they are prepared to address the world's greatest challenges. I'm pleased to share with you today details of our first VUR and invite you to go to our website to look at the full report. Countries have been reporting on their progress on global goals since 2016. New York City sparked the movement with its voluntary local review in 2018, and local governments continue to innovate. Los Angeles and Pittsburgh have demonstrated leadership by working with university students, including some from Carnegie Mellon, in their review process. And shortly, we'll hear about exciting work that Hawaii is doing at the state level. Voluntary reviews are how the world is communicating about the global goals. Carnegie Mellon's Voluntary University Review demonstrates that universities are also a critical partner in achieving these 17 ambitious goals by 2030. Through our VUR, we found that Carnegie Mellon has activities ongoing in all of the global goals across 3 mission categories of education, research, and practice. And these activities are incredibly diverse. Across education, research, and practice, activities related to Goal 4, quality education, and Goal 8, decent work and economic growth, were most numerous, which is not surprising for an institution of higher education that employs many people. Activities related to Goal 11, sustainable cities and communities, also were identified abundantly, reflecting our presence and focus in a city across education, research, and practice. Efforts to protect and safeguard the world's cultural and natural heritage are also addressed by Goal 11, and Carnegie Mellon's College of Fine Arts bolsters the number of activities under this goal. While CMU is the first university in the world to conduct a VUR, our aim is not to be the only one. Our hope is that it will spark action at other institutions of higher education. We recognize that this initial VUR is a starting point. And as with any research, it is an iterative learning process and we welcome engagement. And as part of our process, we conducted a virtual 17 rooms event in May. This event, created by the Brookings Institution and the Rockefeller Foundation, was helpful in learning about initiatives that aren't always captured on paper and identified connections with different parts of the university. Over the next academic year, we intend to deepen the analysis of the global goals and incorporate feedback mechanisms to validate initial findings. This will inform future efforts to establish partnerships within and beyond the university to help achieve the global goals. For other American universities interested in doing something similar, we found it useful to talk to colleagues working in local government, nonprofit organizations, and the private sector. Through the process of engaging our community and educating them about the global goals, we can more effectively work together to achieve them. In closing, I'd like to thank the hundreds of students, faculty, and staff who engaged in Carnegie Mellon's VUR process, and in particular, the Sustainability Initiative Steering Committee and Advisory Council for their leadership. Thank you again for the opportunity to be with you today as we share the release of our VUR.
Thank you so much, Provost Garrett, for sharing all of the work on the SDGs going on at Carnegie Mellon University. It's wonderful to see you again, and congratulations again on being the first university to conduct a university-wide SDG review. My name is Elizabeth Cousins. I'm the president and CEO of the United Nations Foundation, and it is just remarkable to hear from so many voices, sectors, and communities from across the United States about not only how people are embracing the Sustainable Development Goals, but more importantly, how people are using them in very practical ways to address the challenges and aspirations most relevant to local communities. You know, next week will mark the 5-year anniversary of the SDGs. And I don't think 5 years ago when the goals were coming together, that we would have dared hope that the framework would have so much resonance across so many diverse constituencies here in the United States and obviously globally, even if we obviously still have so far to go. COVID-19, the climate emergency, the urgency of tackling systemic racism and inequity, all of these challenges and so many more that are so acute only reinforce the underlying urgency of the SDGs. The whole logic of the goals, as you all know, was to tackle deep, underlying, interconnected challenges across our societies, economies, and natural systems that were creating or accentuating pressing vulnerabilities in all of our communities, and to tackle them with new ambition and urgency. The SDGs are universal. They are interconnected. They are profoundly about the real issues that matter to real people in real places, as much here in the United States as anywhere else. And at the heart of all of them, at the moral heart of the SDGs, is that commitment to leave no one behind. That commitment could not be more urgent today as the pandemic upends lives and accentuates inequities that, in fact, have been leaving people and whole communities behind for years, for generations, whether that comes from racism, from broken justice systems, the climate emergency, health threats, gender discrimination, or the brutal intersection of all of the above. You know, we have such a tantalizing future ahead of us if we can summon the imagination and solidarity to seize it in ways that we've just been hearing about already. But we have so much at risk, including hard-won progress and resilience that so many communities have fought to achieve. And we also know that progress will require diversity of leadership, diversity of innovation and action. And that's among the many reasons that I am just delighted that we will now turn to discuss the very rich experience of and leadership of the state of Hawaii. Hawaii was a leader on the SDGs even before there were SDGs and has been a real pathbreaker both in the United States and globally. So I'm therefore extremely honored to be able to introduce the governor of Hawaii, David Ige, to tell us about Hawaii's experience with sustainability and the SDGs, including conducting the first ever statewide review of progress. Welcome, Governor Ige, and over to you.
Aloha. Mahalo for the opportunity to join you virtually all the way from Hawaii. I'm honored to be joining today's speakers in recognizing American Leadership Advancing the United Nations 2030 Sustainable Development Goals during the 75th UN General Assembly. The world has changed dramatically since we last convened to mark our progress on climate action and sustainability. We are all confronted with the challenge of COVID-19. It is a wake-up call that we are a globalized society where our actions have direct impact on each other. We see the challenges of collective action to make the needed changes to respond to this pandemic. Our actions can ensure that we emerge stronger, more equitable, and more resilient. Hawaii is committed to doing its part to achieve these global goals through consistent engagement with our local community and the international community, especially our partners in the Pacific region. We are the most isolated and most populated island community on the planet, 2,500 miles from the nearest landmass, and we see the impacts of climate change and sea level rise in a very real way, from hurricanes to wildfires, coral bleaching, king tides, and flooding rains. These impacts are happening each and every day. So as an island economy, sustainability is not simply a goal, it's a responsibility. Or as we say in Hawaii, it is our kuleana. We are connected to everything that we do, connected as a family, connected to our neighbors, and connected to our environment. Knowing this, we must go beyond merely caring for what exists now. We must protect the environment for our children, for their future. In Hawaii, we embarked on a journey to define a common set of goals for our many stakeholders to become more sustainable. We brought state and local government, our federal partners, businesses, nonprofits, community organizations, all together to identify common goals and the metrics we would agree to pursue them. Together, we identified goals on clean energy, local food production, watershed protection, invasive species control, green workforce and education, and smart, sustainable communities grounded in incorporating our host culture's values and over 1,000 years of indigenous wisdom and practices. We call this effort the Aloha Plus Challenge to push ourselves to achieve these goals with aloha. And as a state senator in 2014, I sponsored the bill endorsing and supporting the Aloha Plus Challenge. As governor in 2016, I was honored to host the International Union for Conservation of Nature's World Conservation Congress here in Hawaii. With over 10,000 delegates from 192 countries, my administration set the stage to place Hawaii at the forefront of sustainability with the Sustainable Hawaii Initiative. Hawaii was the first state to enact a law that aligns with the Paris Agreement and the first state in the country to commit to 100% clean renewable energy for electricity by 2045, which many other states like California soon followed. We also have committed to protecting 30% of our priority watersheds because we know that fresh water starts in our watersheds. We've committed to effectively managing 30% of our nearshore waters with established management areas. And we've committed to protecting our rich biodiversity against invasive species through the first comprehensive biosecurity strategy, because if left unchecked, it could cost billions of dollars in economic losses. Now, as a recognized local 2030 hub, Hawaii is taking action on the global goals through our local SDG framework, the Aloha Plus Challenge, and is measuring our progress through an open data dashboard with community-driven metrics and indicators to hold ourselves accountable. This year, I'm proud Hawaii will be the first US state to report our progress on the UN Sustainable Development Goals through our voluntary local review, which includes the work of our counties, businesses, and local community. This first of its kind report can help raise the bar for local SDG leadership across the United States and the world. And we are glad to join other cities and nations globally in taking this important step. These are our core sustainability goals, and with the economic impacts that we are experiencing from COVID-19. We are doubling down on our clean energy economy, protecting our natural resources, creating green jobs and education pathways, and building smarter, more sustainable communities. While we look to chart where we go post-COVID, having the voluntary local review gives us the opportunity to reflect on what we have accomplished to date, take our bearings, and chart a course for a better Hawaii that we all want to see, as I'm sure other leaders like yourselves are doing. As we all know, the climate crisis is here and affects all of us, and we must find ways to come together. The United Nations is that promise. The SDGs are our common language. Through the alignment of local, state, national, and international action, we can align our canoes in the same direction to help each other arrive at a more sustainable, equitable world for all of us. Mahalo for this opportunity to share these thoughts with you today. Aloha.
Thank you so much, Governor Ige, for your leadership, for your example, and for that powerful metaphor of the SDGs as a common language. I think that's incredibly important and resonates throughout this whole conversation. I'm very pleased now to welcome the U.S. Senator for Hawaii, Brian Schatz, for a conversation about Hawaii's work on the SDGs and its efforts to build a sustainable recovery from the pandemic from the local to the federal level. Welcome, Senator Schatz.
Thank you for having me. Thanks for what you're doing.
Well, Senator, let me start by asking you, the SDGs at their core are about solving our greatest challenges together and ensuring that no one is left behind. How do you see the value of the SDGs for Americans, for Hawaiians, and why is American leadership on the SDGs at home and globally so important?
Well, the first, let me take the last part of your question. The reason America has to lead is because America has to continue to be the indispensable nation. It is just a fact that what we do, for better or worse, is something that is followed all around the planet. The way I view the SDGs and how they've been useful to the state of Hawaii and especially the city and county of Honolulu is to kind of understand, now they use the word intersectional a lot. It's not a word we use in the state of Hawaii very much, but it is a sort of continental United States way to understand something we already know, which is that we're all in the same canoe. And if we're not paddling in unison, we will all go in circles. And so pitting housing against environment or pitting economic development versus clean energy is exactly the wrong way to look at things. And so what we've been able to do through SDGs and through some of our efforts, especially the Hawaii Clean Energy Initiative, is to sort of reposition some of these issues as economic development opportunities. A good friend of mine always says, paint a picture and paint me in it. It is not enough for us to think about our goals relative to climate in the abstract in terms of how many degrees Fahrenheit we can bend that curve down. It has to work for people, and the SDGs try to ensure that policymakers and people in a position of authority execute in a way that works for everybody.
No, thank you. I love that metaphor too of painting people into the picture. These goals are really mostly about being relevant to real people and meaningful in their day-to-day lives. Well, let me ask you about COVID and the recovery from COVID and all of the conversations underway about how we build back differently and better. You were a founder of the Hawaii Green Growth Local 2030 Hub, which predated the SDGs, and your work with different sectors is a real model for how we can bring these different lines of effort together. As you think about response to the pandemic, how does that experience shape your priorities for recovery, and how do you see the SDGs playing into that?
Well, I think we want to make sure to meet people where they're at, which is to say they don't have a lot of headspace and we don't have a lot of capital for truly transformational reform efforts in the middle of this absolute emergency as it relates to people being hungry and homeless. And so I don't know how this aligns with sort of what the expectations are with respect to what I was expected to say. But I think it's really important for us to remember that if we start to talk about reform efforts that sound a little too pie in the sky, then we're going to lose traction. And one of the beauties of the SDGs
I think, Senator, if you can hear me, I think we've lost your audio. And unfortunately, there's unnecessary and unexpected audio in my side with a phone call coming in. I apologize. I'm not sure we're going to be able to get you back. It doesn't. Let's see, let's work on it for 1 second, because I know your time is very tight. We only have you for a few more minutes. You're able to hear me.
I'm unable to hear you.
Oh, you're back. Can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
We are hearing each other. It's a metaphor for our times. But
sound is back, and I still can't hear you though.
All right then. I'm looking to our tech people to tell me who's hearing whom.
Okay, other people can hear us both, so that's good.
Okay.
Why don't we do this? Because I have a committee hearing in 7 or so minutes, I will just wrap up with the following. You know, we started the Hawaii Clean Energy Initiative around the same time as the Hawaii Green Growth Initiative. And one of the things that we got from folks in the business community was that, you know, you're going to destroy the reliability of power, you're going to destroy Hawaii's economy. And then you got from the other side, hey, this isn't enough. This is a planetary emergency. And what we did was we sort of kept our heads down and just grinded and grinded at that, against that goal. And we started with a very weak clean energy goal of 10%, and it was actually voluntary. And then we found that we hit the goal. And so we went to 20% and made it mandatory. And then as Governor Ige said, then we went to 40%. And now we're at 100% clean energy. And we have cheaper energy than we had when we first started the Hawaii Clean Energy Initiative. And so one of the things that I'm most proud of with respect to the SDGs, with Hawaii Green Growth, and with respect to the Hawaii Clean Energy Initiative, is that we've found a way to make these priorities actually work for folks. And now we have the Hawaii Chamber of Commerce, the Waikiki Hotel Association, and everybody else saying, yes, we should reach 100% clean energy. And so the purpose of SDGs and the purpose of leadership in this context is to make sure that this works for everybody as we're moving towards these global goals and each play our part. So thank you. And I'm sorry I couldn't hear you, but I hope that was helpful.
It was superb. Thank you, Senator Schatz. I know you can't understand what I'm saying or hear me at the moment, but others can hear. Thank you for bringing up the energy example again, because that is such a powerful story and a model that others could follow. Thank you for your grace under technological pressure. And really, thank you for joining us when I know your time is short and you have pressing duties. Well, thank you all. Hawaii's work on the SDGs really does reflect leadership from so many different communities, and it is a powerful and very granular example of how joined up effort and continuing to ratchet up ambition can really be driven from the local level, and especially needed at a time when we are truly all hands on deck on so many fronts. Well, as we look to strengthen all of our hands for the future, we talk often about young people and youth, both as the ultimate stakeholders in all of our work, something our generation clearly owes to the next and the one after that, but also as real agents of change and leaders. We heard earlier from Fatimata that it is youth leadership that is really driving some of the most determined conversations and opening up new prospects for real progress and change. And that is why I'm so pleased next to introduce our next speaker, the UN Association of the United States Youth Observer to the United Nations, Dustin Liu, who I am very proud to be able to work with over the next year at the UN Foundation. Dustin, it is over to you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Cousins. It is such a pleasure to join you all for this important event. As the U.S. Youth Observer to the United Nations, I have the immense privilege of connecting young people to the work of the UN. And over the past month after assuming this position, I have been on a listening tour, connecting with young people across the country and hosting conversations to hear from them directly about the global goals. I come to you today filled with inspiration after hearing the stories of how young people are working locally while thinking globally, and showing incredible initiative and leadership in pushing towards the Sustainable Development Goals. Changemaking can be difficult, especially in this moment of converging crises, but when I think about these stories of young leaders stepping up to face global issues, I am filled with energy. Young people are bringing these conversations to the table. I think about a young woman I spoke to just last week in Wisconsin who is writing letters to the administrators at her school on the imperative to include SDGs as a topic in her education. Young people are encouraging civic engagement. I think about Day on Democracy, a youth-led organization focused on creating a more accessible democracy by removing barriers to political participation on college campuses. And young people are building communities of social change. I think about the UNA USA campus chapters on over 120 college campuses, mobilizing a movement of young people to care about global issues. Growing up, I believed that global issues were to be left to the grown-ups, that there were things that were too difficult for us as young people to understand. I was wrong. I am here to reaffirm that we as young people understand these goals because of our proximity to these global issues. Young people are being affected by global issues every day. Just this weekend, I heard from a group from Jackson County, Oregon, who participated in our listening tour. They shared about how they are being evacuated from their homes due to fires exacerbated by climate change. Young people understand that communities are on fire. They are stepping up to organize mutual aid and support those who have been impacted. Young people we spoke to throughout the month have lost loved ones due to systemic inequities in our country. They understand that Black and brown bodies are being murdered, that communities of color, people with disabilities, members of the LGBTQ+ community are experiencing a disturbing opportunity gap. And these young people are using their voice and agency to move the needle towards a more equitable future. Young people bring not only the awareness and lived experiences of these issues, but bring to this moment energy, creativity, and hope. Youth leadership is critical to achieving the SDGs. I strongly believe that the capacity to make change grows over time, and by involving young people, you are playing a role in the development of change makers that we need. Time and time again in my conversations with young people, I have heard stories of adult allyship, of institutional commitments to center youth voices, and the impact that has on youth representation. I think about my time as a student trustee at my alma mater, an institutional commitment that was aimed at uplifting student voices. That platform allowed other student voices to join the table as well, and it built in me the change-making tools that have brought me here with you all today. It is only when we radically rethink the way we involve and integrate youth voices at the local level, the federal level, in universities and in boardrooms, that we are able to fully realize the power of youth leadership in this moment. To close, I invite all who are on the call to think about a single tangible action you can do today to ensure that young changemakers are given the opportunities to show up and be heard in the spaces you lead. Young people have the appetite for this work. Young people are already leading this work. Imagine what we can achieve if we are working in partnership with each other. When young people ask me why they should care about global issues, I share that we are experiencing such complex problems. We need every single person on board to realize the change we hope to see. And I invite you to play a role in making that reality possible, to center youth voices, and to honor the innovation, creativity, and stories that young people can bring to this moment. Thank you for your time, and I hope that you all keep good health and good spirits. I'd now like to welcome our co-host and UN Foundation colleague, Casey Brown, for closing remarks.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dustin, for your inspiring and your clear words. I feel better knowing that you are leading the way and in partnership with us. My name is Casey Brown, and on behalf of the United Nations Foundation, the Brookings Institution, and our fellow panelists, leaders, and change makers, I just want to thank all of you for participating and joining us today amidst the mayhem that is being on internet during UNGA. What we have heard throughout this discussion really at its essence is a collective story that helps us better see and understand the most fundamental of questions ever more consequential today. What is America, and where can we go together? As you've just heard, we come to this discussion with our own unique perspectives and from different places, from coast to islands to coast and in between. We carry, each of us, our own personal and institutional stories of struggle and conviction amidst the craziness that is a relentless 2020. But we are, all of us, also cognizant of the many and intersecting challenges that must be addressed in tackling this pandemic, in correcting the injustices to race and inequalities that are too pervasive, and in choosing a more sustainable path for our families, our children, and our future amidst an accelerating climate crisis and our burning planet. But from today's conversation, I also see that we, as a collective, are hopeful and determined, creative and innovative, exercising humility and curiosity with an appreciation for partnerships along the way. I'm inspired by this group and their commitment to the principles and the spirits of the SDGs, taking root not just here, but in classrooms, boardrooms, government offices, and on the streets across this country. Far from being an abstract or a nice to have, we see that the SDGs are a concrete fixture and a guiding path for our response and our recovery. So if you're inspired too, like Dustin said, we hope that you will get involved in whatever way that you feel comfortable. You can reach out to one of us, write your elected officials, urge your peers to join with the universities and cities and states that are committed to the SDGs. Speak with your wallet or through the ballot box. Engage your employees and your employers alike. Talk to that city librarian that the mayor referenced. Talk to your children. Call your grandparents, and use your voice to help us shape America's future for the better. After all, as Fatimata reminded us at the beginning of this session, hope is the sound of your own voice. So thank you again for joining us, and we look forward to what's next. Have a wonderful afternoon.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe for more videos from Brookings.